Let's try to paint another bush with the brush that we created together. Imagine the bush as several separate 3D forms, like spheres. Then paint over it with the brush we have created together. Again, I start with a darker shade of green, and gradually I select lighter shade of green, and I paint lighter layers on darker layers. When you paint, imagine you are painting on a 3D form. So avoid direct movement of brush and try to have careful movement of your brush. Paint with darker brush between groups of leaves to show that this bush is a 3D form. Add shadow beneath the bush and reduce the opacity. Fade the edge of the shadow. Painting flowers over the bush always improve your work because it creates contrast between colors. I want to use this picture as reference. I paint a single petal, then I duplicate it. Start with the base color, then with lighter and darker color, I add details on the left and right side of the petal. I add shadow layer, merge all of the layers together. Adding shadow beneath the flowers will always help to separate it from the bush. Use hue saturation to edit the color of the flowers to have more color variation. In this video, you saw that we define a brush, then we use it to paint bush. I also want to show you how to define a brush for leaves of the tree. So you can paint a tree and use this brush to paint the leaves. Same as the first brush that we defined to paint bush, ask yourself which pattern is repeating again and again. I think this pattern is repeating, so I drew this several leaves. Then I draw a rectangle around it and I go to edit, define brush. The first thing that you need to change is spacing. It determines the space between brush marks. You can change the angle, so the angle of the brush mark will change when I paint. You can also activate shape dynamic and set control to pen pressure. By doing so, when you apply more pressure to the tablet, the size of the brush tip will increase. Minimum diameter controls the minimum size that when you paint, a brush mark will have. It means the size of the brush is still depends on the pressure I apply to the tablet, but I cannot paint a brush mark less than the minimum percentage that I define here. Jitter means randomness. With more angle jitter, more angle randomness of the brush mark will happen. If you set control in angle jitter to direction, the angle that a brush mark will have when I paint will follow the direction that I paint, will follow my hand direction. Transfer control the amount of the opacity of the brush mark. With less pressure, I will have less opacity, and with more pressure, I will have more opacity. Again, determines randomness. If you increase the percentage, you will have more opacity randomness of brush marks. If you increase the minimum opacity of the brush cannot be less than this amount. So even with a low pressure, if I increase minimum, I will have a brush mark with a high opacity. So let's test our brush. You can always return back and edit the setting. Again, I start with the dark shade of green, and gradually in 3 or 4 steps, I select lighter shade of green and I paint over them. I hope you like this video. Please practice to define your brush.